Number 15. If you're a car aficionado, the next video is going to be fairly painful to watch. This natural disaster occurred in February of 2014 at the National Corvette Museum in Bowling Green, Kentucky. 8 beautiful Corvettes are gleaming in the showroom when suddenly the entire floor starts to buckle. It's 5:38 in the morning and no one is around to do anything about it, although it doesn't seem like there is much that can be done. Mother Nature appears to have made up her mind, and today she wants some vintage Corvettes. Small holes start to form in the floor and dust chokes the room. One by one, all 8 cars fall down a newly created sinkhole that's 30 feet deep, 40 feet long and 60 feet wide. The designer vehicles are upside down in a heap of twisted metal in less than 1 minute. The museum was understandably closed for the rest of the day as they tried to sort things out. Fortunately, 5 of the 8 cars were able to be fully repaired. Unfortunately, the cost of repairs was well over $1 million, and that's not including damage to the showroom floor. Rather than scrap the last 3 cars, however, Corvette decided to proudly keep them on display for all to see. After all, one man's wreck is another man's treasure. As for the sinkhole itself, it was likely just an act of nature. Bowling Green is historically known for its vast networks of naturally formed underground caverns, as the Corvette company is now painfully aware of. Number 14. It's about midnight at a busy intersection in Guizhou Province, China, when a bus with brightly colored flowers painted on the side silently approaches its next stop. Everything appears to be running exactly according to schedule. That is, until the bus hangs a sharp left, at which point the thing becomes disastrously delayed. The bus's front wheels suddenly become snagged. It seems as though a small hole has opened up directly ahead. A pedestrian hears the bus abruptly stop. He turns around just in time to see the hole greatly widen and swallow the entire vehicle. Now only the back end of the bus is barely visible above the road's surface. The entire ordeal happens in less than a second, and it looks as though no one could have survived. Fortunately, there were only 3 people inside of the bus at the time: an unconscious driver and 2 stunned passengers. The driver absorbed the full force of the impact and had serious head injuries, but the passengers were only mildly wounded. They huddled together in the vertical vehicle until an emergency team can rescue them. It's a long wait as medical workers try to extract the victims from the natural disaster. Even though there isn't much time to waste, the team makes sure to move as cautiously and deliberately as possible. After all, just one false move could open the hole up even wider and spell the end for everyone, including them. By the end of it all, it takes another 40 minutes to rescue the passengers, and the bus itself is not extracted from the sinkhole for another 4 hours. Number 13. A man and a woman are getting off a bus in South Korea, shopping bags in hand. They take less than 10 steps into the station before the clean tile under their feet gives way and sends them plummeting below. A random sinkhole has struck again. It's a vicious 10-foot fall that takes them both to the hospital for minor injuries. Rescue workers had to use a crane and a safety harness to pull the injured couple free. Try as they may, investigators have never fully determined what caused the sinkhole to form. Number 12. This footage, captured by surveillance cameras outside of a noodle shop, shows 5 Chinese citizens patiently waiting for their bus to arrive. Little did they know that their ride would be delayed, but not for typical reasons. The 5 strangers shuffle about as multiple people pass them by. Then, without warning, the pavement beneath them suddenly crumbles under their combined weight, and they are crushed beneath a mixture of dirt and tiles. A large bus sign falls on top of the pile for added measure. Everyone is injured except for one woman with exceptionally quick reflexes. As the sinkhole swallows her alive, she grabs onto an exposed pipe at the last minute and prevents herself from falling in. She briefly looks down at the carnage in disbelief before climbing back out. A concerned crowd gathers around the rim of the hall so they can better survey the carnage. After a bit of deliberation, they tentatively reach in and begin freeing the victims one by one. According to news reports, the victims suffered injuries to their limbs, but nothing life-threatening. The exact cause of the sinkhole was never determined. Number 11. Two 11-year-old brothers named Louis and Mackie are roughhousing one evening in a McDonald's parking lot in Rosedale, Maryland, when they make a curious discovery. The very ground they are standing on is light and bouncy, almost like a trampoline. The two boys are happily jumping up and down when the vicious sinkhole eats them both. Louis and Mackie feel like they are falling down a narrow tunnel forever. They bounce off the walls like laundry down a chute, until finally they make a hard landing at the bottom. Both of them are now hurt and terribly scared, but they know that they have to try and get out if they ever want to see the light again. Mackie bravely grabs the firmest patch of soil he can and begins to try to hoist himself up. He doesn't weigh a lot, and it looks like the wall is actually going to hold as he steadily climbs towards the top. He is a good distance up when the dirt suddenly gives way and throws him all the way back down. He lands on his head. The poor child has a huge gash on the back of his head that will later require 3 staples to close at the hospital. But for now, escaping is all that matters. Adrenaline courses through him as Mackie makes another desperate attempt to climb out. This time, he tackles the 30-foot hole with twice as much gusto and manages to break free. He promises his brother that he will get help and promptly disappears from sight. Mackie's family is watching television in their living room when the injured child comes running inside, covered in dirt and blood. He explains what happened as they listen in disbelief. They've never heard of something like this before. Could the ground really just literally open up on him? Meanwhile, back at the McDonald's parking lot, a random stranger discovers Louis when he hears muffled screams coming from a hall. He assures the kid that everything will be okay and runs off to call 911. It takes firefighters over 40 minutes to extract Louis from the hole. They eventually climb down, hooking up to a harness, and safely lift him out. They suspect the hole was originally an abandoned well. McDonald's accepts that the sinkhole was on their property, but they have yet to accept actual responsibility. Before the accident, they had simply filled it up with some mulch. Now it's properly covered with a huge steel grate. Number 10. This harrowing footage comes from the city of Shenzhen, which is just outside of Hong Kong. A 25-year-old security guard named Yang Jiabin is on patrol when suddenly the city streets open underneath him. There is no time to get out of the way. He plummets 50 feet below. Call me morbid, but I can't help but wonder what exactly goes through Yang's mind as the world devours him whole. One moment he is ensuring the safety of those around him, and the next, he himself is completely helpless. Bricks and a bus stop land on top of his unconscious body. The crowd is absolutely stunned. Brave bystanders now work together to save him. They're willing to risk their own lives as they descend the pit and claw away at the wreckage. They finally manage to free Yang from his tomb, but by the time paramedics arrive, it's too late. Despite their best attempts, the young security guard has already perished. City officials believe that heavy rains may have caused the pipes to burst and wash away the soil. Either way, the footage left behind shows that sinkholes can happen at a moment's notice, and even in cities that are seemingly well developed. So, the next time a 16 by 50 foot pit opens up in front of you out of nowhere, don't say that Yang and I didn't give you a fair warning first. It does happen, and you could be next. Number 9. Deputy Dora Linda is driving across a barren stretch of road in Bexar County, Texas, when the asphalt suddenly rips open beneath her tires. She has driven onto a weakened part of the road, and now she's falling at a high rate into darkness. Her car flips completely upside down as it plummets 20 feet into the murky waters below. The dark waters may have broken her fall, but now it's pouring into the interior of her car. To make matters worse, this is no ordinary groundwater. To her horror, The poor deputy now finds herself totally submerged in raw sewage. The fetid fluid washes all around her and invades her mouth and nose. Her vehicle is still completely overturned, which means that there is no way to escape as the overwhelming stench takes over her senses. She struggles to take one last gasp for breath and receives a lungful of toxic waste instead. It's a horrible way to go. While her tragedy unfolds, another man is finding salvation. He was driving in the other lane when the sinkhole formed, and he, too, landed in the putrid pile. However, when another civilian sees the accident and rushes in to help, he manages to live another day. Dora, meanwhile, tragically expires. As usual, a broken pipe is to blame. The 54-inch pipe burst one day and washed away the soil beneath the road. As sad as it may be, the accident was just waiting to happen eventually. It really makes you wonder how many other patches of road are out there right now going through the same thing. Please, drive safely. Number 8. A 20-inch pipe caused well over 24 hours of problems for residents in Baltimore County, Maryland, many of whom were left without running water for an extended period of time. On June 20th of 2016, sometime past midnight, a massive underground water pipe burst open. This water pipe happened to be underneath a major roadway, and the gushing flood of water that ensued was enough to displace the soil, causing a gigantic sinkhole to form. By the time the road had finished collapsing, the sinkhole was over 1 full car lane wide. Baltimore County officials were now left with a midnight crisis to deal with. Aside from having a ton of infrastructural damage to the roads, the surrounding communities were now left without water as well. The pipe supplied water to 2 major water towers, both of which were now rapidly depleting. Crews from the Department of Public Works scrambled to refill the towers with water from nearby Towson reservoirs. In the meantime, Baltimore County officials went door to door to deliver water to impacted areas. They also opened the Baltimore County Fire Department Station 17 to the general public, so that they could fill up their own containers with as much water as needed. Finally, officials brought bottled water to nearby retirement home residents to help those who were unable to help themselves. As for the roads, the extensive damage took more than 1 full week to repair. Overall, everyone considered themselves lucky that the collapse had happened in the middle of the night. Had the roads given way during peak hours, countless lives would have undoubtedly been lost in the wreckage below. Number 7. Looking at the photos and footage of this massive sinkhole in Harbor, Oregon, it's hard to imagine how something so large could have started out so small. Truth be told though, this dangerous pit was originally no wider than the size of a volleyball, and it was only 7 feet deep too. When Kyle Rice learned that a huge sinkhole had opened up nearby, he saw it as the perfect opportunity to get some aerial footage with his drone. As he piloted the camera high into the sky, he was amazed to discover just how large the hole was. Its 60-foot diameter made it the biggest sinkhole that the state had seen since 1996, and it was still growing. 2 months earlier, heavy rains had caused a buildup of water underground. The saturated soil soon gave way to a small sinkhole that would silently spread without notice. When another rainstorm struck in February, it triggered a landslide that would take out almost 4 lanes of a highway. The damage took weeks for the city of Harbor to repair. No one was hurt, but the next time a monster sinkhole crops up in Oregon, and believe me, there will be a next time, not everyone is guaranteed to be so safe. Number 6. In the summer of 2016, downtown Ottawa was almost completely restructured, and not by a government-approved program, but rather a gigantic sinkhole. It was about 10:30 in the morning when the sinkhole first appeared at the light rail construction site. The hole was only in its infant stages, yet large enough to swallow a family van without a problem. The hole soon grew larger and larger until it stretched across 4 highway lanes and threatened to collapse all nearby buildings, including a major shopping center. The entire tourist district was at stake. The area was effectively shut down as city workers frantically pumped concrete into the sinkhole to protect the foundation of the surrounding buildings. Meanwhile, all nearby businesses were evacuated and everyone was strongly advised to stay completely away from the downtown area in case more sinkholes unexpectedly popped up. What truly separates this sinkhole from the rest, however, is that this time, getting blown up was as likely as going down. The chaotic scene was soon punctuated by a bitter odour and a high-pitched whistling noise. The sinkhole had severed a major gas line. To Ottawa's credit, the city's quick emergency response is what kept this from easily turning into one of Canada's worst national tragedies. No one was harmed. Massive property damage aside, this could have been far worse. Number 5. On November 8th, 2016, a devastating sinkhole rocked the Japanese city of Fukuoka at 5 in the morning. Residents heard a huge crash and looked out their window to see traffic lights, power lines, and large chunks of street and sidewalk all falling into an endless black abyss. The sinkhole was 50 feet deep and about 100 feet wide. It stopped at the edge of large buildings, which could topple below at any moment. As the world crumbled around them, businesses and homes were left with no power or working phone lines for days. Gas leaks filled the air with dangerous toxins and posed an additional explosive threat. Fortunately, since the accident happened in the early morning, no one was hurt. Nonetheless, almost 5 lanes of highway were lost. Japanese emergency crews aggressively went to work to repair the extensive damage. Amazingly, the massive project took only 2 days to fully repair. They would have reopened the roads on the 3rd day, but safety inspections delayed them for another 4. 2,000 trucks, each loaded with a special soil that was mixed with quick-drying cement, quickly filled up the hole. Looking at the side-by-side comparison pictures, you'd never notice that anything was wrong. In fact, the city's mayor said that they rebuilt the infrastructure better than ever, 30 times stronger, according to him. "We're very sorry for causing great trouble," the mayor politely added. Number 4. This sinkhole is what's left of an old ore mine in Solikamsk, Russia. What exactly caused it to form in 1995 depends on who you ask. Many of the residents say that the mine simply collapsed, but the official explanation from the mining company is that an earthquake caused the mine to flood. Either way, there's now a humongous sinkhole on the edge of town, and guess what? It's growing larger by the day. As of November 2014, the sinkhole was only 60 feet wide and 100 feet deep. 1 year later, however, the sinkhole had increased to a depth and width of more than 400 feet. At this rate, it's logical to think that the sinkhole could be pushing 1,000 feet by now. Let's just put it this way. It's so big, you can literally see this sinkhole from space. You can probably guess that the nearby locals are pretty scared at this point, and for good reason too. There's a second mine that is still connected to the one that collapsed. Russian authorities have assured the town that everything will be okay, but the locals are fairly sure they've all been bribed by the mining company. As such, they're just waiting for the day that the second mine collapses and ends them all. What a happy existence. Number 3. On August 11th, 2015, an underground tunnel in Dongguan, China slowly started to collapse from heavy rains. Not many people noticed the problem until the next day, when a giant hole threatened to kill them all. The tunnel was already under construction when things went awry. Huge sections of the street soon started to break away, exposing the foundation of buildings as pipes shattered and sprayed gas and water into the wreckage. Countless pedestrians were near the construction site when the collapse happened. They all managed to get out of the way except for one construction worker who was sadly busy working on the ground. A car also fell into the sinkhole, but no one was inside. To make matters worse, this is far from the first time that Dongguan has experienced such an event. In fact, the very same road has collapsed no less than 4 times in the past 3 years, each time worse than the last. This time the sinkhole managed to reach more than 3,000 feet before being feebly filled with cement. It's hard to say exactly how much longer it will be before the next disaster strikes, but based on the road's track record, it seems likely to happen at least one more time. Number 2. Here's an example of what can happen when a city doesn't properly maintain its sewer systems. In 2007, a small, impoverished neighborhood in Guatemala City became the site of a rather repulsive underground catastrophe. The disgusting disaster struck just before dawn, and while it definitely classifies as a massive sinkhole, perhaps a stinkhole more aptly describes it. For about a month leading up to the event, the local slums had been rocked by tremors and loud noises underfoot. Nobody was sure what was happening at the time, but early one morning, their answer revealed itself in the form of a 330-foot deep sinkhole leading all the way down to the sewers. It was essentially a gigantic open sewer line, and the rotten smell that poured forth was sickening. The giant sewer pit was large enough to swallow 12 houses whole, along with at least 3 people, who fell roughly 30 stories to their horrible deaths, where they were lost among a rushing stream of sewage and putrid debris. Police, meanwhile, set up a 500-foot perimeter around the sinkhole and evacuated over 1,000 people from their homes. A simple clogged pipe is to blame. It eventually burst open and displaced the surrounding soil with a river of rushing sewage, causing an empty cavity to form beneath the city, which soon collapsed. Even though Guatemalan officials knew about the problem well in advance, they failed to act quickly enough. Now, you'd think they would learn from their lesson from all of this? But 3 years later, history would repeat itself in the same general neighborhood, and this time, things would turn out much, much worse. In 2010, a volcanic eruption released an abundance of ash into the air, and much of this ash ended up in the sewage drainage system, where it clogged the pipes and raised the water pressure to dangerous levels. This, combined with a massive tropical storm that struck roughly around the same time, created the perfect conditions for yet another burst pipe, and, of course, another sinkhole shortly after. This time, the sinkhole was 60 feet wide and swallowed a large clothing factory. Dozens of people are suspected to have fallen 300 feet to their doom, though the exact numbers are obscured. You see, this was during a time of terrible weather and mass evacuations. Over 125,000 Guatemalans were displaced, and over 100 more are thought to have been killed in landslides throughout the country. In all of the ensuing chaos, keeping an exact tally was difficult for city officials to do, as they were simply too busy trying to survive at the moment. Number 1. In 2013, Jeremy Bush returned to his Florida home after a long day's work. He shared the house with his brother, and the two normally worked a second job together. Jeremy's manager, however, had told him that he didn't have to come in today. He relayed the news to his brother and then went into his own room for the night. It was the last exchange they would ever share. A short while later, Jeremy heard his brother screaming from the bedroom. Jeremy leaped to his feet and rushed into his brother's room to see what was wrong. There was nothing left of his brother's room except for a mattress sticking halfway out of a freshly created hole that had already filled itself with dirt. Thinking fast, Jeremy jumped into the hole with a shovel and started frantically digging the dirt away. To this day, he swears he could hear his brother crying for help. Jeremy dug and dug for an eternity, not even thinking twice about his own safety. He wouldn't stop digging even after the police came to remove him from the home, which could collapse at any minute. He still holds himself personally responsible for not rescuing his brother to this day. A rescue team soon arrived. They tried to use thermal technology to detect a heat signature in the rubble to better locate his brother. When they couldn't find one, they knew that the worst had happened. Jeremy's brother was no more. To make matters worse, not even a full team of city contractors could recover the body. The best they could do was load up a crane with offerings from friends and family and slowly lower the items into the sinkhole that had cut his life short. The home was demolished, along with a few other surrounding houses that had been declared unsafe. 2 years later, another sinkhole opened up on the exact same property that Jeremy and his brother used to live on. Fortunately, the government had bought the land and fenced it off just for this very purpose. Still, the new sinkhole opened terrible memories that Jeremy wished could have simply been left buried for good. Hey there, are you a fan of horror stories? Because I've got horror stories, oh my god, I've got a lot of horror stories! And you can find all of them over at my YouTube channel, which you can find in the description below, or there's probably something on the page you can click, because these guys are really good editors. Now, let's get on with it, shall we?